Indeed, Bev. Indeed, for a lot of us, it was the first time, yes, that we experienced the same thing together. But having said that, because of the huge digital divide, I mean, the school children in the mountains of Lesotho or in different places in Asia Pacific where they don't have proper internet, they of course will not experience it the same way. But what did happen because of COVID, there was a massive adoption spurt of technology. In Southeast Asia alone in 2020, more than 40 million people turned on the internet for the first time. And that is important because that allowed, for example, families to access telehealth for the very first time. In many countries, it was not safe whatsoever to go to a hospital for care. It allowed a lot of families, for example, to access the gig economy services, children to do distance learning, and of course, the working from home. So that, and above and beyond that, for all of us, it allowed us to connect with loved ones. And that was very, very important, especially in the very long lockdowns that many of us have been enduring.
You talk about technology going from bad to good, but of course there was also the other side of that equation, control of information, misinformation. So it wasn't always a positive effect.
Oh, absolutely. There's one thing I said in the book, it's kind of a thread throughout digital pandemic, is that strongmen and authoritarian leaders have used the pandemic to level the playing field in their favor. Whether you're looking at India and the misinformation there on a massive scale, lying about the supply of oxygen and the death numbers. In Russia, doctors who dared to speak out earlier in the pandemic about things like lack of PPE were detained, or some of them even jumped out of windows mysteriously. And then, of course, we had the Donald Trump era that some of us are almost forgetting about already, but massive misinformation there. And that is a big issue here in the United States, because I think we've come to a point, and it's a very dangerous point, especially if you rely on public health messaging to fight a pandemic, that if people don't know what to believe, if they're accessing now alternative unverified sources, that's a big problem. Finally, I have to answer this question with the mention of China. It seems to me that they have not learned anything since the SARS outbreak in 2003, when they lied. And they lied about it. They covered it up. Same thing here earlier on in the pandemic. There was a big suppression of information, and things like delaying the WHO investigations, things like that. So that was a sad finding of the book, actually, that the Chinese Communist Party did not change its way for the better.
Yeah. Victoria, very close to home for us, is in its fourth lockdown. We seem to be stuck in a control model in Australia. How are other countries moving? What can we learn from other countries so that we can move to a point of living with this? Because it's not going away anytime soon.
Sadly, it isn't going away soon, and I'm very familiar with that control mode. I'm Canadian, and I've spent most of the pandemic there, and we've had several lockdowns. Bev, there's one thing here, is that the COVID-19 virus is not done with us. In fact, it seems to me it's almost outsmarting us at every turn. And I think what happened in Melbourne, but also recently in Singapore and also in Taiwan, is that if you allow those little cracks to appear, some complacency, you take a victory lap too early, you're going to end up in trouble. In Taiwan, their most recent spike was caused by apparently China Airlines pilots coming back, going into Taipei and spreading the virus there. In Singapore, it was airport workers that went into Changi Airport, which is a tourist destination in its own right, and also spreading the virus from very red-colored countries into Singapore. So it's very, very important to not ignore any detail whatsoever in fighting pandemics.
Yeah. How, in your view, will work, community, government be transformed forever because of this pandemic?
Massively. There's no going back on some things. One of the interesting things I predicted, I have 26 future gazing predictions in the book, but one of the things that was discovered is the vulnerability of supply chains. And I think what we're going to see henceforth is a lot of countries, a lot of governments adopting a never again attitude, a never again 100% reliance on China as the warehouse of the world for things like PPE and ventilators. So a lot of countries, Canada, US, and others, are kind of nationalizing or making their supply chains, their manufacture process more at home. Travel is going to be a big one, changing for everyone. I think we'll never see again the return to the level of business travel that we once did. I think that ordinary people will take fewer and more sensible trips. And another thing we're seeing, as you well know, is the emergence of something very controversial called vaccine passports. It is a good idea on the one hand, but on the other, my big fear about this is privacy issues. There's much more hacking going on now than ever before, but also the equity issue. For example, the average Canadian to leave the country, they have to take that very expensive COVID test, which can double the price of an air ticket. And then they have to get the vaccine as well. There's a lot of preparatory steps needed that add to the problem. Finally, telehealth is going to be huge, a massive adoption spurt there. People not going to hospitals or doctors anymore, but accessing medical care online. It's quite exciting, but still a reason for some anxiety.
Indeed, because there can be misdiagnoses and you don't get the same sort of ability to talk to your doctor as you did, but still critical. You talked at the start about, how we connected because of technology, and there were so many different apps that emerged that allowed us to talk. But I wonder the overall impact, how healthy did we stay mentally, and what are going to be the long-term impacts of the mental health of this pandemic?
It's a great question. Bev, a few weeks ago, I asked the head of WHO exactly about that, the mental health aspects of the pandemic. And his answer was very shocking. He said that he expects the trauma emerging from the pandemic to be even greater than after World War II. And that is backed up by a lot of experts. Now, on the one hand, the pandemic has been positive because it's encouraged a lot of people to come out with their anxieties, their mental health issues. But on the other hand, I don't see many governments, including my own, putting in those resources to deal with people who have anxiety issues, mental health issues. It even goes down to very small things, us going back and socializing with people, going back into the workplace. A lot of people I talked to said, they're very nervous about restarting those social interactions because it's been almost a year and a half now and we just aren't used to it. But lots to worry about there, and warning card to governments to put whatever they can, throw whatever they can at this.
Michael, such a good analysis of what's been just an extraordinary time globally. Thanks so much for joining us.
My pleasure.